The Prosecutors Podcast is brought to you by Progressive. Progressive helps you compare direct auto rates from a variety of companies so you can find a great one, even if it's not with them. Quote today at Progressive.com to find a rate that works with your budget. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations.
Hello, everyone. This is Mike.
And this is Gibby.
And we're the hosts of the True Crime All the Time Unsolved podcast. If you haven't already, we'd love to invite you to come check us out. Starting in January of 2017, we've amassed over 230 episodes of some of the most intriguing unsolved cases in true crime history. We cover some of the very big unsolved cases, but we also like to cover some of the lesser known cases, some that you may have never heard of. We dive into the details. We talk about the victims, their life, the circumstances around their disappearance or murder, and we cover the potential suspects and persons of interest. We try to give you all the known facts you need to satisfy your amateur detective. We like to think that we don't take ourselves all that seriously, but we take true crime very seriously. You can listen to True Crime All the Time Unsolved now on Podcast One, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
You know you want to. I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors. Today on the Prosecutors, we continue our discussion of the Casey Anthony case. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, by my unfaltering co-host, Alice.
I tripped over so many words as we were speaking.
You never falter,
I
Alice.
Falter often.
Even if you stumble.
Day. I stumble
You don't
and falter a lot. Thank you for that vote of confidence, especially because, again, I'm spending a late night recording with you, and it makes the whole day's stresses go away, and that's not sarcastic at all. I really mean that.
There's nothing I'd rather do, Alice. This is my happy place, so...
Same here. And thank you guys for joining us back in, because I'm afraid our first episode of Casey Anthony was so rambling because we were both like, you know, when I'm gonna throw in a Texas reference here. When you're at the rodeo, you have like either it's the sheep for mutton busting or the cows for, bull riding, not cows, bulls for bull riding, and they get them all riled up right before they go out so that they can be particularly feisty. I felt like we were just like in our little pens, so excited, and then we pressed record and we're talking on top of each other, so excited. So all to say is this case gets us fired up.
See, I just thought we were full of great insight that the listeners would enjoy. That's what I thought.
Time will tell, Brett. Time will tell.
Well, I guess we should dive back into it then. For those of you, well, surely you haven't already forgotten. It's only been a week, but we started the Casey Anthony case. We've gotten through some of the timeline. We've talked about the last day Kaylee Anthony was seen alive, and we talked about the things that Casey did in between when Kaylee went missing. And now we've reached the point where Casey has finally admitted to her parents that, yes, she has not seen Kaylee in a month. She is missing, and in the words of Casey, she has been kidnapped.
And Brett, before we dive into this, let me just say, we often see in our line of work people who have lied for a long time and been able to fool those around them, whether it's, a crime of fraud or, drug dealing, that sort of thing. And someone who has been kind of keeping at bay the questions that will ultimately incriminate them. And when they are met with the full force direct question that goes to the heart of whatever they're trying to hide, in this case, where is Kaylee? the person usually breaks down with emotion, or they are unable to compose themselves because the question they have been dreading has come. We see none of that here. On July 16th, during her initial statement to the police in the early hours of that day, Casey tells the police that she spoke to Kaylee on July 15th, the day before. By the way, this is completely false, even based on what she just told her parents. And she said that Kaylee was, quote, excited to talk to me. Casey also told the police, quote, I don't know where Kaylee is, and that's the God's honest truth. Casey takes the police to Zanny's apartment where she says she dropped off Kaylee, and the apartment is now vacant. But when police look into the records of that apartment complex, they find that it has been vacant for at least 140 days. So there's no way that Casey could have dropped her off just about 30 days prior at a vacant apartment. The police then take Casey to Universal Studios, where Casey claims she works. Listen closely to what happens next. The police know a thing or two about Casey at this point, so they have more knowledge about her than she has told them. And they are playing along because they know that Casey does not work at Universal Studios. The police take her up to the security officer, but the security officer tells her that they do not have her as an employee on their list because, in fact, she does not work there. Instead of backing down, Casey doubles down and she asks the security officer to check again. And yet again, they cannot find her name on the list. This is not a surprise to the police, as I've already said, because they know Casey doesn't work there. But they want to see what's going on. Sometimes you'll have this where even if we know someone's lying, they're going to get caught in it. So kind of walk them through it because it's more powerful for the person to be confronted with their own lie than me confronting them with a lie. So I can imagine the police here are like, well, we're walking up to the security guard. The security guard's going to blow up her lie and then she's going to drop the act and tell us everything. Again, Casey doesn't operate like most people does. Casey is very charming. She's acting confused, like, of course I work here. Please check again. And so the security lets her through so she can show the police where she works. As the police officers are walking with Casey down the hallway, Casey is waving at people she knows, and they all look back at her quizzically. After wandering the lot for 45 minutes looking for her office, imagine this. Casey is quite literally just going down hallway after hallway and meeting dead ends and saying, oh, never mind, my office is this way. Not for a couple minutes, not for 10 minutes, not for 15 minutes, but for nearly an hour. Casey is just wandering around Universal Studios, pretending like she is looking for her office and waving at people as if it were a normal day in the office. And everyone is looking confused because she doesn't work there and they don't know her. She finally admits after 45 minutes that she's been lying to her parents about her job. And she does not, in fact, work at Universal Studios anymore. Casey is arrested at that point and charged with child neglect, and her bond is set at $500,000.
We gotta stop. We gotta stop here for a
There's
second.
so much there.
Because once again, there is something about this person and the way she lies. Lots of people lie. According to House, everybody lies. And this is probably true. But there are very few people who will carry a lie to the lengths that she will carry it. And I don't necessarily want to harp on this, but I think it's so important that I'm going to. In the last episode, we talked about how Casey will tell a lie even though it's obvious that the lie is going to fail at some point, that it's going to cause consequences. So the first thing Alice talked about was taking the police to where Zanny lived. She had to know, even as she was doing that, it didn't matter which apartment she pointed to, Zanny didn't live there. And any check of the records were going to show that Zanny had never lived there. And in fact, the apartment she pointed at was vacant and had been vacant for 5 months. So there was no way that Zanny lived there, and she dropped, even if Zanny lived there before, she didn't live there when Kaylee disappeared, and it turned out Zanny had never lived there. And then, and you would think, right, Alice was talking about calling people on their lies. You would think when the police said to you, well, let's go to Universal, we'll see your office, talk to who you work with, that at that point you would say, okay, you got me. I don't work at Universal. It was a lie. I just didn't want my parents to know. I thought they'd be disappointed in me. It's not even that hard to explain why you lied about this, right? I mean, that's what's crazy about this. She probably could have explained that away as just, I didn't want to disappoint my parents. Because she did work at Universal a few years before and she got fired. And she had just continued the lie that she kept working there. But instead of doing that, she takes them back there. And what is she thinking? As they're wandering around the Universal lot, going up and down hallways, until finally they just sort of come to a dead end, and she says, okay, I don't work here. Like, how did she think that was going to end? What was the game plan? And I just don't think she had one. I think she tells these lies, and they just spiral on her. And she just keeps telling them until she literally cannot tell them anymore. And that's the thing that is so dangerous about her and difficult about her, is she will tell a lie until it is literally impossible to tell it anymore. So if it never becomes impossible, she's never going to break from it. So you can never know anything based on what she says.
And what's particularly surprising about her psychology is the utter lack of remorse. You know, quite the way the police officers who are with her describe it is she reaches the end of a hall and there's quite literally nowhere to turn in Universal Studios. And she turns around and matter-of-factly just says, actually, I don't work here. I've been lying. Not a, you've caught me. I'm mortified. I am lying to the police and my daughter is missing. This is all going to look very bad on me. It was just matter of fact, like, well, there's another fact I just said.
And Alice is 100% right. I mean, it is a tactic of the police to let someone lie, sort of lie themselves into the truth, to just lie until it becomes obvious to them even that they can't lie anymore. And you'll see this sometimes. I mean, there's some famous examples of police even allowing suspects to have press conferences. So you'll have parents who kill their kids and they'll say they were kidnapped, and the police will, well, we're going to have a press conference and you can make a plea to the public or whatever. And the police know good and well that it was probably the parent, but they let them do it anyway. And just the pressure of the lying gets to them, and they finally admit, no, you're right. Yeah, it was me. I'll take you to the body. I mean, that happens all the time. And you got to think, the police in this situation, look, when the police hear that your daughter's been missing for 30 days and you never called the police and didn't do anything about it, they are going to jump to a conclusion. It's funny, in true crime, people are always criticizing the police for they focused in like a laser on that suspect. Yeah, because it was so obvious they did it. And so they focused in on them because they weren't going to waste their time with anybody else. As soon as they heard this, they thought, Kaylee's dead and Casey killed her. That's what they thought as soon as they heard that story. And you have to think, they believed they were going to do this whole Universal Studios thing and Casey was going to break. That's what they thought was going to happen. And just the sort of nonchalant way that in the end she's just like, you got me. I was lying. I don't know. I just wonder if they thought, man, this is going to be different.
Early in the morning of that same day, July 16th, after the trip to the supposed apartment, but before the trip to Universal, the police dropped Casey off at her parents' home. That morning, someone deletes Casey's Firefox browser history.
And that's significant, right?
By the way, I mean, yes, there are tactics to just delete things that the police can't find. But for the most part, guys, when you delete things off your phones and your electronic devices, it can be recovered by forensic analysts, and they are recovered. We see this a lot in child porn cases. They know that the police are coming for them, and they delete all of the child porn off their phones. even if you go to the little trash can that says delete all, like permanently delete, your phone still has like a shadow of a memory. And if you know what you're doing and you're analyzing the phone, you know how to find it. And that's why even though she deleted her Firefox browser history, there is a record that someone deleted the browser history.
And if you were paying attention last time, you may recall what was one of the searches on the Firefox browser history the last day anyone saw Kaylee alive?
Foolproof suffocation.
Correct. So that's the 16th. At this point, as we said, Casey has been arrested with child neglect. Her bond is set at $500,000. About this time, the police realize there is no Zanny. There is no nanny.
And Brett, you know what's so confusing? The first thing that jumps out at me when you say that there is no Zanny, there is no nanny, is that George himself said Kaylee told him she was going to go see Zanny.
Oh yeah. And it's such an interesting thing. We're going to, as we talk about this trial and we talk about why Casey was acquitted, just go ahead and give you some hints. Part of it is her parents and the things they say and how much you can believe them. I don't know how much you can believe George. It's possible George is telling the truth. Certainly possible that Casey has conditioned Kaylee to lie about Zanny and just tell him we're going to see Zanny. 100%. Also possible George is lying about that. It's a hard thing to know. But what we know for certain is there is no Zanny. Casey apparently made this person up. We're going to talk more about the real Zanny because there is someone with her name later on, but there was never anyone who kept Kaylee, who babysat, named Zanny, and the police have figured that out. So they know that Kaylee wasn't kidnapped by Zanny. Casey's been arrested. She's got a $500,000 bond, which is a pretty high bond for child neglect. You can tell everybody knows this is more than just neglecting a child. On June 22nd, the police will announce that they have found hairs consistent with Kaylee's in the trunk of Casey Anthony's car. And at this point, they state that Casey is a person of interest and they suspect Kaylee has been murdered. Now you've got national coverage of this case. This case goes viral before that was even a thing. You can only imagine what this case would be like now. In the age of Twitter and TikTok and everything else, this case would have been crazy. And it was pretty crazy at the time. You couldn't get away from this case. Nancy Grace is on the scene talking about Top Mom. Everybody's looking for Kaylee. Everyone has decided that Casey probably murdered her daughter.
And Brett, I think that was just a slip. You said June 22nd, but it's July 22nd. And so note that the police are honing in on Casey almost immediately. They talked to her July 16th, and kind of within the week, they are putting out there that they think Casey is responsible for the death of her daughter. This is some fast police work, but also it's not that they're honing in on Casey. It's that there are so many fingers pointing right at Casey, and they can be confident enough within the week to be making this announcement.
So that's July 22nd, as Alice said. Everybody's looking for Kaylee, but no one's finding her. We got dogs on the scene. We got Texas EquiSearch looking for the body, or hopefully by some miracle, the young girl's still alive. You have a lot of volunteers, but nobody's finding her. Fast forward to August 11th. A man named Roy Kronk, who is sort of a meter reader out in the neighborhood around where Casey lives, he calls the police and he tells them that he had stopped to relieve himself in sort of a swampy area right off a road that cuts through a forest between two neighborhoods, one of which is Casey's. He says he sees something white that looked unusual to him, and he decided to call the police. On August 12th and the 13th, Roy calls the police to see whether they found anything. Turns out the police hadn't actually gone out there. On the 13th, an officer finally agrees to meet him in the area. It is raining. It's a terrible day. It's August in Orlando. I can only imagine how miserable this is. They tramp around in the mud for a while. The officer gets irritated, says he doesn't see anything. He actually begins berating Kronk for calling him out there for no apparent reason. Kronk would later testify that he spent more time yelling at him than for looking for what Kronk thought he saw, which was a body.
This is really interesting. The police do get a lot of calls about seeing something strange, and without something more specific, just I saw something white and it looked strange, not I see a body. I can understand why the police didn't immediately go out there. I think it's kind of interesting that Roy calls the police 3 times to keep checking on this particular thing. And it may be that he had a sinking feeling as to what it was, but didn't want to be the one to discover the body. But, if it weren't for his repeated calling, the police wouldn't have gone out there. But even when they go out there, it's pretty overrun with like weeds and bushes, this area. So it's not that it's particularly easy to see things here.
So around the same time Roy is calling the police, August 9th, which is Kaylee's 3rd birthday, comes and goes. There's no sign of her. On August 21st, reality TV star bounty hunter Leonard Padilla, he arrives on the scene and proclaims that Casey can help find Kaylee if she's out of custody and bails her out of jail. He pays that $500,000 bond that she had, and his justification for this is if we get her out, maybe she'll break, she'll take us to the body, and we'll finally have a resolution here.
Again, no, all of these tactics, for like the vast majority of people, it does work. Right. The vast majority of people, if the mother is in charge, is responsible for the death of a child, they want their child to be found. And so this bounty hunter does this a lot. And it's a fair bet that if the mother had anything to do with the murder of the child, they ultimately want the child found and they will lead you to them. And so I know where he's coming from. It's just that, as we said before, Casey does not act like most people.
And I think if Leonard had asked the police before he posted that $500,000 bond, they would have said, that might work on most people. It ain't going to work on Casey. And they were none too thrilled about this, and they wanted her back in jail. And 9 days later, they come up with a reason to do that. On August 30th, they will rearrest Casey, and this time for petty theft. They discover that on July 8th, which was, 3 weeks after Kaylee went missing, Casey had stolen and forged $700 worth of checks from a friend. In fact, Amy Huizinga, you may recall, is one of the friends she talked to on the phone the day Kaylee went missing. She would stay at her home on occasion, and apparently when she did that, she stole some checks, which she would later forge for this $700. But she doesn't stay in jail for long. By September 5th, she is once again out of jail on bond, but she also doesn't stay out of jail for very long. By September 15th, she is back in jail. The police have now expanded their charges, and they include the child neglect, which we talked about earlier, but also lying to investigators and that petty theft, and also use of a forged check, which comes from the petty theft itself. But she is not kept. She's got, they have their $500,000 bond, and she's released the next day on electronic monitoring. Bond is an interesting thing. This is a little bit of an aside, but obviously, whatever you might think about Casey, she hadn't been convicted of anything. She's innocent until proven guilty, and so she has every right to be out on the street. But obviously, there are other considerations like, is she dangerous to the community? Is she a flight risk? The reason for bond usually has more to do with the flight risk than anything else, because when you put that money down, if she flees, you lose that money. So it ties you to the community. And here, she also has this electronic monitoring, which will make it easier to find her. She probably would not be seen as a danger to the community because the person that she is accused of hurting is her own child. She has no other children, so it would be difficult to make that kind of argument. So it's going to be difficult to keep her in jail, at least at this point.
And what's really interesting, if you've already seen, is we're reading them as just kind of days in a timeline. But what Brett just said is important. Casey has no criminal history. She has not spent time in jail. And here she is going in and out of jail 3 or 4 times. And when she gets out on bond, instead of being chastened or remorseful, she does other things. You might be thinking, well, the police are just finding reasons to arrest her, and that might be true, but there are real reasons. They're not making up these reasons. She really does steal $700 worth of checks. She really does lie to investigators, as we have seen. And so she is continuing to basically live her life with disregard for any sort of norms, but also the rules and laws, even with the threat of going back to jail, which is not something that is fun for anybody. And here she is going in and out of jail repeatedly, but she keeps going back to living life the way that Casey lives life. The Prosecutors Podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Let's face it, sometimes multitasking can be overwhelming. Like when your favorite podcast is playing and the person next to you is talking and your car fan is blasting, all while you're trying to find the perfect parking spot. But then again, sometimes multitasking is easy, like quoting with Progressive Insurance. They do the hard work of comparing rates so you can find a great rate that works for you, even if it's not with them. Give their nifty comparison tool a try, and you might just find getting the rate and coverage you deserve is easy.
All you need to do is visit Progressive's website to get a quote with all the coverages you want, like comprehensive and collision coverage or personal injury protection. Then you'll see Progressive's direct rate, and their tool will provide options from other companies all lined up and ready to compare, so it's simple to choose the rate and coverage you like. Press play on comparing auto rates. Quote at Progressive.com to join the over 27 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
Sinus pain, congestion, heaviness in the face and eyes, headaches, runny nose, or watery eyes. Over-the-counter and prescription drugs with side effects and messy sprays are a hard way to live for many people suffering from these conditions. Well, I'm here to tell you about a revolutionary product that will change your life forever. Introducing Tivic Clear Up, an easy-to-use FDA-approved medical device that fits in the palm of your hand.
Alice, as you know, I've been sick. I've had congestion. I've had sinus pain, all the symptoms you have when you have a cold. And I used my Tivic Clear Up, and it was one of the only things that gave me any relief. Created by doctors and neuroscientists, Tivic Clear Up stops suffering by using bioelectronic technology to reduce sinus pain and congestion. Simply glide Tivic Clear Up on areas of your face where you are experiencing sinus pain. Try Tivic Clear Up today with a 60-day risk-free trial. Go to tivichealth.com, that's TIVIC health.com, and enter promo code prosecutors22 to receive $20 off plus free shipping on your Clear Up device. Tivic Clear Up works when nothing else can. Alice, the world has always had its share of con artists, swindlers, and scammers, and social media is just their latest megaphone. Scamfluencers is a podcast from Wondery that tells the shocking stories behind infamous influencers and the scams that define them. The latest season dives into the real estate scheme of Serena Shih. When Serena arrived in the Coachella Valley, home to the famous music festival, she immediately fit in. The young, fashion-forward real estate investor was wearing all the trappings of wealth because she had a plan.
Brett, I was hooked learning about She in Scamfluencers. She was in town to fundraise for her dream project, a 350-room lifestyle resort, the kind of place where each room comes with complimentary Botox. But after raising a staggering amount of money, her investors grew weary with progress reports featuring doctored photos of a construction site. Before long, they would learn there was no construction site, no blueprints, no room service Botox. It was all a $22 million lie. Listen to Scamfluencers on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or listen 1 week early and ad-free by joining Wondery Plus in the Wondery app. We think you'll love it.
Alice, it's a podcast we've talked about a lot, and it's one that our listeners need to hear, The Jordan Harbinger Show. And I know that every day somebody tells you that you just have to listen to some podcast, and you nod and say sure, and then you never listen to it. Don't let that happen here.
Jordan's show, which Apple named one of its best of 2018, is aimed at making you a better informed, more critical thinker so you can get a sense of how the world actually works and come to your own conclusions about what's happening, even inside your brain. We're all about critical thinking here. We want people to think for themselves, and Jordan's show is perfect if that's something that interests you. Each episode is a conversation with a different fascinating guest, and when I say there's something for everyone, I really mean that. Listen to Jordan's episode with Sammy the Bull Gravano, learn about the mob, or hear, in her own words, the story of Amanda Knox and her wrongful conviction.
In another episode, he talks to a hostage negotiator from the FBI who offers techniques on how to get people to like and trust you, which honestly sounds useful and disturbing at the same time. We really enjoy the show, and we think you will as well. Search for The Jordan Harbinger Show. That's HARB as in boy, IN as in Nancy, GER on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Now, a word from our sponsor, BetterHelp. Brett, I know we've talked a lot on our show about how important it is to take care of your mental health. The stresses of everyday life, from family, work, personal, professional, can get overwhelming at times. And I think everyone goes through a rough patch at some time or another. And that's why we are so excited about our sponsor, BetterHelp. They help us care for our minds and how we experience life. BetterHelp is an online therapy that offers video, phone, and even live chat-only therapy sessions, so you don't have to see anyone on camera if you don't want to. It's much more affordable than in-person therapy, and you can be matched with a therapist in under 48 hours.
And Alice, we've talked a lot about the value of just talking to someone who is a professional, and BetterHelp is a way you can do that without the hassle of in-person therapy. Now our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/prosecutors. That's betterhelp.com/prosecutors. If you need to talk to somebody, don't wait. betterhelp.com/prosecutors.
And so much time is passing. You know, Kaylee, she disappeared in June, and now we're in September. On October 2nd, Casey is officially named a suspect in her daughter's death, even though no body has been located. At this point, I think what's happening is the police and the prosecutors are coming to grips with the fact that they may never find Kaylee's body, and they may have to try this case without a body. But given the circumstances, they feel confident that they can convince a jury that, number one, Kaylee is dead, and number two, Casey is responsible for it.
On October 14th, Casey is charged with first-degree murder, aggravated child abuse, aggravated manslaughter, and providing false information to law enforcement. Casey faces the death penalty and is held without bond. Note how quickly she is brought to charges. Murder investigations, any investigation with some complexity, and this is a complex case because there's no body, because time has passed, and there are not a lot of reliable narrators, whether it be the family or Casey herself. There's just a lot of conflicting stories. It would be hard to do an investigation in this case. But here they are. Within 3 months of first talking to Casey, they have already brought very hefty charges. They are not trying to downplay this. They're not trying to go for an easy kind of win in order just to hold Casey. They are going for the whole jugular. They're going for the death penalty already. And we can talk about whether they rushed too quickly, they were too eager, or they were facing too much pressure to bring charges. But this is a relatively quick timeline in which charges are brought. On October 24th, the police say they found evidence of decomposition and chloroform in Casey Anthony's car. This is interesting. Within weeks of the indictment, the police are releasing evidence. This is kind of interesting. Never does the police have to release evidence to the public, especially not in a pending case. And oftentimes you'll hear this, no comment, it's still a pending matter. I think almost all prosecutor offices will take that stance because they don't want anything they say to jeopardize what is entered in court. But here, obviously, there is so much media attention on it. They're kind of trying by media here, and they're releasing bits of information to the public.
And I think this is a huge mistake. I think that we talked about information and hold back information and everything else before. And we talked about how when you don't have a suspect and you're trying to figure out who did it, you need to release more information because, once you find the person, it's like Delphi. Once you figure out who it is, you're probably going to be able to tie them to the crime. Now, seems like maybe that's not the case, but assuming a normal crime that is a stranger type murder, once you figure out who your suspect is, usually you can tie them to the crime pretty easily. The difficulty is figuring out who it was. It's like the Maggie Long case. You figure out who those 3 suspects are, you're going to be able to tie them to the case, you're going to be able to get a conviction, right? Here, you don't need that. You know who your suspect is. You've arrested them. You've charged them with first-degree murder. The press and the public do not matter. And I realize this takes a bold police department, but frankly, once you arrest someone and charge them with first-degree murder, in my view, the position of the police and the prosecutor should be, you'll hear it in court. And let me tell you why this becomes important in this case. You all know that Casey Anthony is going to be acquitted. Everybody knows that. She's not going to be convicted of killing her daughter. And, the prosecutors will be asked, and everybody's asked, like, why wasn't? How is this possible that she was acquitted? One of the prosecutors would say, well, the problem was the jury pool because everybody had already made up their mind that she was guilty. And obviously all those people were eliminated. So we had to find the only people in Florida who, despite hearing all the evidence in the press, still thought they could enter this with an open mind. And of course they acquitted her because if they didn't think she was guilty by the time they stepped into court the first day, how could we ever convince them? Well, one way you could have convinced them is not leak all the information to the press that they were going to hear in trial. And then maybe you would have had a better jury pool. And I don't understand why you do this. This to me was a huge mistake. They never should have done it. It was self-serving and self-aggrandizing for them to do it, and it's going to come back to bite them eventually.
The self-aggrandizing part is true because they've already brought the hammer with the first-degree murder charges. That is a police and law enforcement action. There's nothing more you have to satisfy the public with until you head to trial. So this is a very confusing thing that they do it on the heels of bringing such serious charges. We still, remember, don't have a body. On December 11th, Roy Kronk revisits that area and calls the police yet again. So remember, he called back in August. A police officer finally came out on the 3rd call and really just yelled at Roy rather than look. And Roy is convinced there's something here. He calls back. And this time, police locate Kaylee's skeletal remains less than a half-mile from the Anthony home. The body is found less than 100 yards from the road in a forested area near the home. With Kaylee's remains is a baby blanket with Winnie the Pooh and Piglet on it. And the body is in garbage bags in a canvas laundry bag. The police will find the mate of this laundry bag, it's part of a set, at the Anthony house. This is huge, Brett. After charges have been brought, finally, what everyone suspects has happened is confirmed. Kaylee is dead and found so close to her home with such tragic things with her. A laundry bag from her own home, her favorite Winnie the Pooh blanket, and stuffed almost carelessly into garbage bags, what's meant for trash, not meant for a small child.
Yeah, and it's crazy to think the prosecution clearly was going forward with this prosecution. They were going to try her without a body. They were going to do that. And then they find the body. And they find, it's almost like a stereotypical dumping of a child's body. Because on the one hand, The body's in a garbage bag. It's in the laundry bag, which came from the Anthony home. And they're able to match these because, as Alice said, they come in a set. They find the exact same one at the other home, but the second one's missing. It's missing because her body was in the bag. And you find this baby blanket, which is just, it's a telltale sign. And we talked about this before. We talked about this in the John Benet Ramsey case. I mean, John Benet Ramsey is found with a blanket. What does that mean? Some people think it points to the family because, as the FBI has said many times, when the parents are responsible, you will often find something like that with the body. It's probably the best evidence that the parents were involved in the John Benet Ramsey case is the presence of that blanket. Now, there are people, including John Douglas, who's sort of the father of behavioral analysis, who thinks it doesn't really mean as much in the Ramsey case. But in this case, you have the body in a bag from the home, dumped in the forest with the blanket. The blanket is almost, it's almost like an apology, right? Like, I'm going to do this terrible thing. I've killed you. I'm going to dump your body. I'm going to put you in a trash bag, but it's okay because here's your blanket. I mean, I don't know. Just, it's such a, I admit there are certain things that I struggle to understand. You do a podcast like this, and it's not just the podcast. If you're a lawyer, and lawyers out there know this, there's this weird thing you have to do when you're a lawyer. You have to separate yourself and your own personal views and your beliefs and everything else. You have to separate that from your job, because your job is to represent something other than yourself and to do it based on sort of objective principles. True if you're a prosecutor and you're representing the law and justice and all those things in the state. True if you're a defense attorney. Certainly true if you're a defense attorney and you're representing people who may have done things that you find reprehensible. You have to put it aside. And I think that helps a lot of times when we talk about these cases, and doing so sort of objectively, because a lot of times you have to put yourself in other people's shoes. This, though, is so difficult for me. Whenever there's a case where parents are involved and accused of killing their kids, it is so alien. I can't even wrap my head around even the conception of what people do. And so you see something like this that is so bizarre. I mean, you're throwing your child away like they're trash, but you put the blanket in with them. I mean, wow. I don't know.
Yeah. We after we finished John Bonet, we're like, we really need to take a break from child murders, especially where potentially the family is implicated. And we are diving right back in, and it's hard. It is really hard not to get angry for Kaylee, because, I mean, she wasn't even 3. All 2-3-year-olds are exhausting. We know both of us have those right now. They're exhausting, and they can be annoying at times, and they are loud, and they are needy at every minute of the day because they are just tiny human beings who need your help to do anything, and it's not their fault. It's just part of the growing up process. And to see kind of how she was treated in the hours before her death, or what led to her death, is very difficult to face, I think, as anybody. And I think that's why so many of you asked us to do this case. There is a reason that this was really at the top of y'all's list repeatedly for years, and we didn't do it for a very long time because it's just so hard to dig in. Okay, they find the body at the end of December. So this is about 6 months after we believe Kaylee has died. So 6 months later, all that's really left is the skeletal remains. About a month later, January 23rd, 2009, police find George Anthony, Casey's father, drunk in a Daytona Beach hotel room, and he has written a 5-page suicide note.
Yeah, and it's just, I mean, this case is tragic. It's one of those cases that became a media sensation, but you just see sort of the utter collapse of this family and these people. The note is worthless. There's no point in reading it. We're not going to read it. You can read it if you want to. It's available online. In fact, Alice was talking about John Benet Ramsey and how I needed a break. I needed a break from acandyrose.com because it was sort of drilling into my brain with all that flashing. Well, guess what one of the best sites to find resources for the Casey Anthony case is? acandyrose.com. So we'll be citing to that later on, and you can find this letter, you can read it, and it's everything that you would think. George says that he was just in the pit of despair. He couldn't save Kaylee, and he didn't want to live anymore. And so he had gone off to do this. This will be used against him later on in the Casey Anthony trial.
And trial comes fast. May 9th, 2011, jury selection begins. We've already talked about how sensationalized this was in the media, so jury selection is going to prove to be a challenge because so many people have heard about the case and probably have made up their minds about the case. And because of this, jury selection takes 11 days. That is an incredibly long time, Brett. I can't even imagine more than a full day. After a full day of jury selection, our last trial took about a day. I was like on the floor face down because I was so exhausted. You have to keep everyone's answers in your brain. You have to be looking at every flick of the eyebrow, every blink, every shrug, every smirk of every person. You know, usually there's going to be dozens and dozens of people in the room in order to be able to whittle down to 12.
By the end of the day, I was like, I don't even care.
Oh,
just
yeah.
whatever.
I was
Pick
like,
the first
just pick
12.
the first one. First 12. Go for it. But that's what you have here. And they probably had a larger veneer than, I say veneer because it's in Texas, we say voir dire.
Voir dire.
Voir dire, even though it's voir dire. And so sometimes.
I've already called the venerie, too.
Okay, there you go. See,
venerie.
I think it's just people trying to see who the outsiders are, right? Like, you didn't say venerie. You must not be from around here. But all to say is that I suspect that this was a particularly large pool that they called, knowing that a lot of people would be conflicted out because of the media coverage in this case. And so 11 days of nonstop questioning. Those of you who've never sat through a jury selection, you are blessed. But what happens is it's a question and answer, and all the jury pool members are identified by a number, and you quite literally raise your hand in response to questions, and there is a huge portion of the picking process where there's probably a lot of one-on-one, where you explain to a judge your answer, or you explain any biases you have, and they try to cure. So you can ask certain questions. Even if I say, I think that all people who smoke marijuana should be legally allowed to do that. But then the judge will ask you a series of questions and say, well, could you follow my instruction about the law? And can you put aside your personal beliefs and apply the facts of the law in this case? And if you say yes, could potentially be cured. And it's a judgment call. But that's what is happening for 11 days. There are questions to the entire pool, and then there's probably conversations one-on-one between the judge, the parties, counsel, and the individual potential jurors. Now, because of the perceived bias of people in Orlando, the jury was actually pulled from nearby Clearwater, Florida. So they're already taking all these actions in anticipation of a biased pool. On May 25th, the trial begins, and it lasts for about 6 weeks. It is a long trial. Closing arguments are on July 3rd, right before the holiday. They take July 4th off, but come right back on July 5th, and the jury starts deliberating. And they don't deliberate long. After less than 11 hours of deliberation, which is short for the length of a trial that this is, the jury finds Casey, to the shock of everybody, not guilty of all counts, except providing false information. Casey is released on the 17th as a free woman.
Yeah, so she's found guilty on these 2 false information counts. She actually appeals them, which I thought was weird. I don't really know what the purpose of that was.
I would take that and run and be like, I'm sorry, I got nervous and I lied. I'll take it and run, because you got off with murder.
Yeah, I mean, she got nothing. She appeals them. One of them is eventually overturned because they charged her with 2 counts of providing false information, but the way the Supreme Court of Florida saw it was basically she just lied during the entire police interview. So rather than her being charged with each lie, the court was kind of like, that was one big lie. So that only counts as one, was essentially what they said. So she did get a conviction overturned, but not because she didn't do it, but because the court just decided that if you lie, 10 times in the same interview, that's one count. If you lie in the next interview, that would be another count. But they're not going to allow you to charge you multiple times for lying in one interview for multiple lies. So she did get those overturned. So yay her, but she still does have the one providing false information count. I remember when this happened, this was 2011. I was clerking at the time. So I was working for a judge at the time. And obviously, law clerks follow things like this. And we were paying sort of loose attention to it. And Alice, I don't know if you remember this real time, but we all thought she's absolutely going to be. There was no question. She's going to be convicted, of course.
And in fact, when the jury was called back or said that they had reached a verdict and were being called back into the jury room, I thought, oh, if it's only been about 11 hours, surely it's guilty, because obviously you can't always tell what the jury's thinking, but it's usually a good sign for the prosecution if the jury comes back quickly.
A case like this that's taken 6 weeks, there's no way a jury's going to acquit in 11 hours. You just would never think that. You would think if they're going to acquit, they're really going to think about this, because it's funny. We talk about the jury standard. We talk about beyond a reasonable doubt. In some ways, it's easier to convict than it is to acquit. You just spend a whole trial where the prosecution is just piling evidence on top of you for why this person's guilty. Particularly in a murder case, you have a victim. And here, a very sympathetic victim, a 2.5-year-old girl. That's, you don't have to go to the light up the room cliche to make the victim seem sympathetic when they're 2.5 years old. And you would think the jury's really going to wrestle with this. If they're going to acquit, man, they're really going to think about this. They're going to talk it through several times before they decide, okay, fine, we're actually going to acquit. So if you're the prosecution and you're a day into this and they're coming back, you've got to be thinking, yeah, it's such a slam dunk. It was easy for them. They went back there, they took a vote. What do you think? And everybody said, well, of course, she's guilty. And then they spent 11 hours just making sure, because we got to give the defendant their due. We need to look at the evidence one more time, but obviously we're going to convict her. The fact that they acquitted her after 11 hours is really stunning. I mean, it is stunning to me that they did that. And that's one of the reasons I think people are so fascinated by this case, is they really cannot understand how the jury could have come to the verdict they came to. If you've seen any of the documentaries on this case, the judge who presided has been very forthcoming. I always think it's interesting to hear from judges. I think it was interesting in the Michael Peterson case to hear from the judge, because it was so obvious when you listen to the judge with sort of the benefit of hindsight. The judge basically said he would have acquitted Michael Peterson. And that goes a long way for me, because the judge heard all the evidence, including the evidence the jury didn't even hear. He was invested in it. So when a judge says something like that, it means a lot to me. In this case, the judge was like, yeah, it was crazy. They totally should have convicted her. There was obviously enough evidence to convict. and I think that's just how everybody felt about this. I would be Jose Baez, who was the lawyer for Casey Anthony. He wrote a book on this. I doubt it was very open and honest. I would love to know his true thoughts. If he actually thought they were going to come back and acquit when he heard they were back with a verdict after 11 hours. I don't think he did. I think everybody thought this is going to be guilty, but it wasn't. And so what we're going to do, and what we're going to spend the next few days doing, is trying to explain to you how and why this happened. And the best we can give you the background on this. And I think the interesting thing about this case, it is very easy to dislike Casey Anthony. Casey Anthony has to be one of the least likable defendants ever. There's a lot of people who don't like Michael Peterson. Michael Peterson's not that likable. he was just played by Colin Firth in a movie, which had to make him more likable because Colin Firth is awesome. But he's not a sympathetic defendant. Nobody would think that. But he is nothing compared to Casey Anthony. I mean, Casey Anthony is so unlikable. So it's really hard to put that aside and kind of look at this with an unbiased view. But that is what we're gonna try to do. And there are things about the case and things about the way the defense presented their arguments that can explain this. The jury's verdict, whether you think it was right or wrong, was not wholly irrational. There was a path for the defense to take where they could get where they ended up. And I think they did a very good job of navigating that path.
Whew, Brett, I don't know. So far, just where we are, we're about to dive into how she got off. Just hearing the facts, hearing the timeline, it's one of those like hair pulling out moments of how the heck did this happen. And I'm really looking forward to this discussion because clearly we already know the outcome. She was acquitted and acquitted quickly, meaning there was probably not a lot of back and forth, and 12 people went back there after nearly 6 weeks of hearing evidence and were essentially ready to acquit her. That is huge. That probably means those people started thinking they were going to acquit by at least halfway through the trial.
I don't know that you could have found 12 other people in America who would have acquitted Casey Anthony.
No, I don't think you can either. And so this is just a fascinating thing. And like we've said many times before, we have been shocked by what the jury does in our own cases. You just do not know. But usually you'll get jury questions. You'll get people, you can tell there's a lot of angst. Right? They refuse to break for lunch. They can't decide on how the lunch is brought in. There's like infighting, and you can just tell based on what's happening coming out of the room that has nothing to do with substance. You can tell by the mannerisms. Like they're like, we're going to get here at 8 a.m. or 7 a.m. We're not going to break till 7 p.m. until we get this done. Or, they come out for bathroom breaks and they refuse to look at one person. They shun one person. Or, there's like tears. But here, 11 hours means essentially everyone agreed pretty close to the time they started deliberations. And that is the real question as to how.
Yeah. And like Alice said, that's something that over the next couple episodes, we're really going to dive into. This is going to be a long exploration of this case. I think that's already obvious. You guys claim that you love the 9-part JonBenet Ramsey thing. We're not going to go 9 episodes on this, but we're going to do a good bit. This is a fascinating case. There are lots of twists and turns. There's a lot of really interesting things that happened in this case. And over the next couple weeks, we're going to dive into a lot of that. And hopefully, by the time you've finished, I don't know that we're going to change any minds. I don't know that we're looking to change any minds. But I hope that you will understand a little bit of what happened in this case better. So if you have questions or comments, we'd love to hear them. prosecutorspod@gmail.com, @prosecutorspod for all your social media. You can join our Patreon if you want episodes early and ad-free. If you don't like listening to podcasts, we also put the podcast on YouTube. And if you're looking for resources that we used in this case, head to prosecutorspodcast.com, and we always list all the sources that we draw from. There's a lot of good articles. There's some really good documentaries on this case. I would say the documentaries in this case are a lot more even-handed than some of the ones in other cases that we've looked at, and I actually found them to be quite helpful, so you should check those out. Also, as we've said, we have a new podcast, The Prosecutor's Legal Briefs, where we deal with breaking cases, developments in the law, trials that are going on, updates in cases that we've covered or cases that are just popular in true crime. We hope you guys will check that out as well. Well, Alice, do you have anything else you want to add before we sign off?
No, come back, guys, and listen to our other podcasts. Let us know how you like it. Leave some reviews for us. And most importantly, just keep talking to us. We are doing this case because of you all. And we continue to leave our emails open to all of you and want to hear what you think.
All right, guys. Well, that's all we have for today, but we will be back next week with more on this incredible case, this case that it has to be one of the most famous in all of true crime. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the prosecutors. The stuff you're about to read just blows my mind.
I watched like a couple of the different documentaries, and it's just like mind-blowing.
The whole like going to Universal Studios and acting like she still worked there when she's like waving at people and saying hello.
And
like,
they're
what are you doing?
"What?" Yeah.
And the police knew the whole time.
Of course, and then when she's caught, she's like, okay. Like, the okay is so crazy.
It just goes to her whole, she'll just lie without any consideration until she can lie no more. I've known a lot of really terrible people who love their kids. Like really crappy, awful people. And treat their kids like crap,
Right.
neglect their kids, go off and go to hard body contests, the bars
Sure.
and everything else, and leave their kids at home, locked in the bedroom or whatever. And still, if something happened to their kids, they would be absolutely shattered. They wouldn't think, well, now I'm free to do all that. No, they would still be shattered.
All this month, stream the funniest films for free on Pluto TV. Watch comedy classics like Anchorman, The Legend of Ron Burgundy, and Mean Girls. Or drop in for a Tyler Perry marathon with a Medea family funeral and Medea's witness protection. Pluto TV also has hundreds of channels and thousands of movies and TV shows like Get Shorty, Be Cool, Key and Peele, Comedy in Color, and more. And no contracts, no subscriptions, no fees, no joke. So download the Pluto TV app on your favorite streaming device and start laughing today. Pluto TV, drop in, watch free.